So today I've got Whitni Wright here with me today. She's from the Wright Tax and Financial Group. And Whitney is actually an accountant for me and my wife and helps us do our taxes every year. And I wanted to bring her in because she's got a lot of experience in taxes and accounting. And also, she has a background in music. She's actually a flutist, and so, one of the things that I've really appreciated about working with Whitney is that she knows a lot about the music business. And when I go to her and say that I've purchased certain instruments or equipment or had to get certain repairs done, she knows what that means and she kind of knows how that might apply to my tax situation at the end of every year. So, one of the things we're going to do today is kind of talk about like the different kinds of accountants there are and what some of those designations means. Whitney's actually an EA, an enrolled agent, so I'm going to have her talk about what that means. And then I've got a few other questions about some of the different tax accounting programs that might be out there, some of the kind of walk-in places that exist, and what the differences are between those and actually working with an accountant and getting that kind of help with taxes. So, welcome, Whitney. It's really great to have you here today. Really, really glad to have you. Could you just kind of give us a little bit of your background, both as a musician, but also as an accountant and what you've been doing?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me, by the way. Um, uh, my background. My background, let's see, I've been with, I've had my company for the last 11 years, which has been really nice. But I've been actually working on taxes for like the last 20 years on that. I decided to finally get my enrolled agent's license designation in 2009 after about 10, 11 years of doing taxes. And basically what that means is that I am a tax expert. That is what I do. I know, that's what I specialize in. The difference between an enrolled agent versus a CPA. For instance, a CPA is a certified public accountant. And notice in the name, it's an accountant. And so their field of study is primarily accounting with taxes on the side. So not saying that they aren't qualified to do taxes. Most of them, many of them definitely are. But their first field of study is accounting, and that's where their continuing education is as well. But they are also licensed per state. So to be a CPA, you need to be licensed by the state. To be an enrolled agent, you're licensed by the federal government. And so just remember, enrolled agents are tax specialists. That is what they do. That is their first field of study. Okay. And they're licensed by the federal government. Whereas CPAs are accountants first, and they are licensed by state. But both are usually, they're qualified usually to help you. But if you have, a deeper dive into certain things, you might want to find an accountant or an enrolled agent that specializes in that specific field as well. Like when we talk about music or, traveling nurses, there's all sorts of different things like that. And so that's very helpful.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think one of the things that I think is worth bringing up is in music, it kind of depends on your field. I mean, music educators may only have one source of income on a given year just from the school that they're working from. But many of us as musicians, we have several different gigs. We might work for different orchestras. I know when I first met you, I was getting paychecks, both teaching and gig paychecks from like 4 or 5 different states. And of course, that was way too much for me to be able to figure out or care to even figure out.
Yeah.
So I think one of the big things that I think is worth kind of bringing up is it's important to have somebody who knows what the rules are, what the laws are, and can help you kind of make sure that you're really doing the right thing with all that. Um, like I said, one of the things is that you have a background in music. Could you kind of just talk a little bit about what that background is, and I don't know how that maybe helps? I mean, you've worked with several musicians with taxes, so could you maybe kind of talk about how that helps out?
Definitely, definitely. I started playing the flute when I was 8 years old. By the time I was 12, um, I was studying with professors from BYU. practicing 6 to 8 hours a day by the time I was 14. So I was a very serious musician. When I declared a different major at 18, when I graduated from high school, everybody threw up their hands and went, "What are you doing?" Um, but I have played in orchestras, I've played in bands, I have taught private lessons, I've done gigs. Um, and I still kind of continue to do that through the years, though I've just recently moved. So again, nobody really knows that I'm a musician yet, but but it still goes up and I still play at a very high level, which is very nice. When you study that hard for decades, it doesn't go away, especially when you love it. And so because of that, you get paid in different ways when you do different things. I played for weddings, you play in orchestras that get put together. And a lot of that is what we consider either 1099 income or income that's just falls under sole proprietorship. There's no documentation issued with it, besides maybe a check, you know. Um, but all of that income is taxable. In the IRS's eyes, it's all taxable, and you need to keep track of that. And so, but the nice part about having income like that is that you can also take expenses to offset that income so that your taxable income becomes lower from that, So, but you just need to realize that there are certain things you need to document. There are certain receipts, notes that you need to take. To be able to, because I don't know about you, but I can sometimes not remember, what I ate for dinner the night before, versus what I did, what gig I did and, a year and a half ago, or 3 months ago, And so, you got to take notes, good notes. Documentation is almost everything when we talk about taxes.
Yeah, I want to get into documentation in detail. But first, can you kind of talk to us a little bit, especially considering our students, especially those who are going to be going out into the workforce soon? Um, what is the value of actually hiring like an EA to help out with your taxes? I've got all my reasons for doing it, and I think they're very valid reasons. But from your perspective, what are some reasons for why you can really help someone with this kind of larger tax thing?
Okay. Well, one of the number one reasons, which I think, and everybody has different reasons on that, but, I'll give you a couple of the top ones. Number one is, even though you have to pay me to do this, I more than likely can save you money.
I think that's a big one.
Yes. And not only that, but I can save you lots of time and worry.
Yes, because nobody wants the IRS knocking on their door.
And if you do have the IRS knocking on your door, because there is that surprise element, you could get picked out of the hat to be one of those that gets just that surprise audit for no reason, right? You want somebody on your side, right?
Right.
You want somebody that can help you walk through that process and get through that as quickly and as well as you can, right?
Right.
And so that is definitely a great value of why you would hire somebody like me. Again, money savings, time savings, worry, help with future things. My tax clients, it's not I just do your tax return and we never speak again during the year. My clients are, hey, I'm moving. How's this going to affect my taxes? What do I need to keep for you? What can I send to you? What advice do you have for me? Timing makes a huge difference. Mm-hmm. There are many times that, we don't think about that. And we don't think about how all the puzzle pieces in our lives can fit together and create a really bad tax scenario.
Right.
So there's tax planning that goes into that. The more that we talk and I understand what your life is, the different changes that are happening or coming up, the better I can advise you on how to make that more better for you tax-wise and financially.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, this year's been a big year for that because, at least gig-wise, I started the year with thousands of dollars worth of gigs lined up, and all of that disappeared in February and March. So that changed things a bit. We'll talk about that later. Um, I think just to follow up on that, yeah, I mean, of course, there is a fee when you hire somebody to help you with your taxes, but my experience has always been that I have saved money every year in the long run. I could never have figured out all of the things that needed to be figured out. And I would have constantly been worried that I was doing the wrong thing, or like you said, I was going to, get picked out randomly and had to prove that what I'd said was real. Which I've never tried to break the rules, but I would be pretty nervous if I was on my own trying to do that. And so it's always nice to know that someone's there to help walk you through it if you had to. Um, kind of like we talked about, that's kind of what your position is in helping people out with their taxes. But there's several other ways of calculating your year end tax stuff. There's online calculators. There's programs that I don't really know much about. And then of course there's kind of like the walk-in places. I'm thinking of like H&R Block and stuff like that. Can you kind of talk about what maybe the advantages of that are, but also what maybe some of the disadvantages or the differences between the service that you offer and what those do?
Okay. Well, I'm a little bit biased in this opinion, but
Of course, yeah, and I think you should be. That's okay.
um, walk-in services are really nice for when you have very simple tax matters and you have a very kind of rigid schedule. You need to get in and get out and without any pre-planning, right? So if you have a schedule where you can't necessarily call in advance and be like, yeah, I'm available this day for an hour or so. Walk-ins are great for that because more than likely they can take you within 15 minutes of the time that you walk in. But you have to be a little careful of that. My experience with those walk-ins, Liberty Taxes, H&R Block, Jackson Hewitt, things like that, their people aren't really trained really well, as in, they do have to take a few little training classes, but it's a seasonal position for them. They're not getting paid a whole lot, and I found, there's a difference with that, and because of that, they're not really as invested in you, uh, and they get paid for quantity, not necessarily quality. So they're trying to get you in and out as quickly as possible because they make more money that way. Okay. And so I think it's great. Like I said, if you have very easy taxes, W-2 or a couple of W-2s, nothing really, else changing and exciting in your life or differences. That way they more than likely won't cause errors or any problems, on your taxes. So I didn't remember the other part of your question. So
Like the kind of also comparing to the online software.
the online. Okay, and online, again, if you have an easy, situation, very cut and dried situation, yes, do it yourself online. That's great. What I've also found though, a lot of times is that the online still charges you quite a bit for your own worry and your own time and trying to navigate through questions which you're not sure what they're asking and how to answer it correctly so it puts the right numbers and the right lines on the form. And I found that every like tax company is a little different. I've walked through some of their self ones just to see, because I've had clients in the past call me and say, I'm not sure what this means, or friends that call me. I'm like, I'm trying to do this online and I'm not sure. I keep answering this question and I know it should show something on my tax return, but I can't find it anywhere, and they're answering the question wrongly, so in the eyes of the tax program, so that's a little limited. So like I said, the little more complicated you get, the more you probably want somebody like me helping you with your taxes. Sure, you have that one job that gives you a W-2, easy enough. You can do that easily without, errors. But past that, we get a little bit more nervous. And students sometimes have a very I guess easy kind of tax thing. But I run into some students that have extremely complicated taxes, and all their friends look at them and like, well, I just do it, on TurboTax Online every year. And she's like, yeah, I just can't do that. Parents have started investments for them in the past. They have, educational IRAs, the list goes on. And, you know, and there are complications in there beyond just I work part-time, for a little, and then I get a W-2. So.
Right. I mean, that's one thing that I was kind of going to ask about as well is, a lot of our current students that either undergraduate students or graduate students, and they have internships going, or they've got a part-time job, or they've got a job on campus and a job off campus, or, the list goes on, or maybe they're teaching lessons on the side and getting paid cash. To me, that stuff gets pretty complicated pretty quick. Maybe they have student loans, all that stuff. Without going into great detail, because everybody's situation is really different, can you just kind of give us an overview of, if you are working with a student, what are you able to do to kind of help that situation and kind of simplify the process for the student at the year end?
Yes, well, definitely. Okay, let's say that you are teaching lessons, private lessons, or you have some gig income on the side. You are considered in business for yourself. You are sole proprietor. Congratulations. You need to be keeping track of that income. Some of the easiest ways that I found to do that are keeping track like on a spreadsheet, or even on the notes on your phone, date, who the money was from, why, that would be like, either a gig or private lessons, and the amount of money, and then keeping track of that. Okay. And on top of that, you want to be keeping track of expenses, because you don't want to have to pay taxes on all that money, and you shouldn't have to. Okay. So let's talk about some of the expenses that go along with that. If you have to drive to get there, or have to drive because of your job, those miles can be taken as expenses. Make sure you're keeping track of those miles and the driving. The easiest way I found to do it are twofold. You can either do an Excel spreadsheet, and a lot of times you can just do this on your phone, which is really nice. You can have all these apps on your phone, or you can have a driving app on your phone, but you just got to remember to keep turning that on and off as you need it, or else it's not going to keep track of your miles for you. But if you are using,
I have to admit, I'm pretty old school on that, and I just have this little flip notebook in the car.
Yeah,
it's on the dash because it reminds me when I get in the car every time. Wait, is this work driving or not? And then I just write, I just keep track of my odometer that way. But that's because
what? That's actually really great, and that usually is probably the most effective, because I don't think we always think about it, right? And then it's after the fact you're like, oh yeah, I did that. I drove to that gig. I drove to that wedding, and, and I think that's a great idea. Having a pocket calendar, or something in your, or a little notebook in your car on that to remind you. I used to do that for years before, we got a little bit more technological,
tech savvy.
Yes. More tech savvy. I'm a digital immigrant, not a first generation. So
I was not born with a touch screen in my hand.
Yes. But when you're keeping track of that, the more details, the better. The ones that you need the most, you need definitely the date. Okay. You need the addresses, both to and from. Now, if this is a common place that you go back and forth, to Johnny's house to teach him lessons, just put the address once on there, because you'll have it for the rest of it, right? Okay. So date, to and from addresses, the business reason why you're doing it. Okay. It's for private lessons, right? And then the mileage. Okay. And that's how you keep track of that. You'll also want to make sure to keep the make, model, and year of your car, and the year-end odometer mileage, the total overall, and those things are important. A lot of times people forget about that part, and sometimes we can kind of work through that and still work with that without it, but it's better if we have it, if it ever comes in question. Other expenses, you had to buy certain music, for that. you had to maintenance your instrument. There had to be some repairs. You had to replace some pads, or a valve, or things like that. And, and even driving back and forth to the music store counts as business mileage. It was for the business, right? And so if you have a home office, or in your case, it could be an office / practice room. A lot of times you can take deductions on that. You have to be careful of that, though. The IRS says that it has to fit 2 qualifications. Okay, it has to be regular, so you need to regularly use it for your business, and it needs to be exclusively used for your business. It's not an either or, it's both. You have to have both. Okay. So if it's your dining room and, and you use it to do your business, but it's also your dining room and you use it to, to eat and other things like that, and personal, things like that, that's probably not going to fly. But if you have a designated room that's specified for your business, you're not storing beds and other things in there per se. I mean, you can still have a little bit of personal effects, but it basically needs to be business first, Right. And we can take deductions for that and reduce that taxable income.
Yeah. That's a good point to make. That's great. So that's kind of keeping track of mileage and keeping track of the space that you may be using and some of that income. Just kind of to cover some other things that we have to keep track of for our year-end stuff. Like, what do you recommend for pay stubs? All the year-end tax forms, all the W-2 stuff that comes through at the end of the year. What's kind of your recommendations for dealing with all that?
Paper is just not fun to deal with, especially like, if you're a transient student, and you go from your apartment, back to visit your parents or move to somewhere else, right? You don't want to be moving boxes of paper. The nice thing is the IRS will let you keep almost every record electronically. So yes, you do get paper receipts for many things. I scan them or take a picture of them with my phone. Make sure it's a good picture, right? And I store it electronically. Make sure you have a backup, in case that, dies, your computer dies or your phone dies, things like that. But that's easy enough these days, which is really nice. And the thing is when I talk about documentation, bank statements and credit card statements do not work. The IRS does not accept those. So don't think that just because you are charging it on your debit card or your Visa card, that you have the statements, and so that's going to be good enough. It is not good enough. They want the actual receipt for each of those transactions. Okay. And like I said, you get these paper receipts, or a lot of times these places will email you a receipt, print a PDF on those email receipts. Store it in your, create a folder called, 2020 taxes or 2021 taxes, or receipts 2021 or things like that, and store them in there, label them accordingly. I usually put the date, who I bought it from, who I ended up having to pay and how much, as my name on that receipt file,
Right.
For each of my PDFs, on that. But yes, you want to store that. Anybody in my line of work will tell you that the more documentation, the better for the most part. I'd rather have you give me a whole bunch of stuff and I say, okay, we don't need this, we don't need this, we don't need this, but great, we have everything else we need, rather than, wait a minute, where is this?
Right. Yeah. One of the things that I do, and I don't know, maybe I don't need to do this, or maybe it's overkill, but I like to split everything up into different categories too. So,
Yes.
if I've purchased instruments, that's one file. If I've had instrument repairs, it's another file. Music purchases, but then I also split out like my equipment purchases, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I've got a bunch of different categories. What's kind of your recommendation on that, or what are your thoughts on doing those sorts of things?
You know what? Categories are great because different expenses count differently. So that actually helps a great deal. When you're paying somebody to do your taxes, you're not necessarily paying them to finish out all your bookkeeping.
Right. That's a
And
good point.
so a lot of times, especially if you have a lot of receipts and things like that, and if you hand them all to your accountant or your enrolled agent, just as a great big jumble, they might just look at you and say, okay, here, you need to categorize these and then give me back in categories,
The old shoebox of receipts issue, right? Like nobody
Yes.
wants the box of receipts.
Yes, a lot of times, and if you really want your EA or your accountant to do that for you, they will charge you for it.
Yeah,
And so,
sure. Of
and
course.
so, if that's okay with you, then that works. But if it's something that you can kind of sort and do on your own as you go, it'll save you a little bit of money.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really once you figure out a system that works for you, it's not that hard.
Yes,
It's
correct.
well worth your time. Uh,
Yes.
well, I guess just a couple things to kind of wrap up, and then I'll give you a chance to kind of cover anything else that you think is important. But so we've kind of worked through this beginning stages of keeping track of things and what you need to keep track of and how you need to keep track of it. But then, kind of at the end of all of this, you hopefully you get a tax return, and so what do you have to do with that stuff? I mean, at the end of this whole thing, I usually get a bunch of documentation from the state and the federal government. What do I do with that?
Okay. Well, there are tax documents that come out every year, depending on who you worked for, and what their requirements for filing are on you, basically. So, when you receive at the end of the year, let's say, you worked for a company where you were a W-2 employee, by January 31st of the next year, they should have mailed out to you or gotten a W-2 to you in that year. And that is something you're going to want to keep to use for your taxes, of course, for your tax return. You're going to see other forms come through, 1099s, and there's several of those. If you're doing gigs for specific companies or churches or other things like that, and they paid you more than $600 during the year, they are required to file a 1099 on you, which means that they are going to send you a copy of that in some way by January 31st of the next year. That goes out with your taxes. Basically, anytime that you see in the mail, and they do this because people like to throw away mail because they think it's junk mail, but they it'll say right on the letter, do not discard. This is an important tax document, right? Keep those. You will need those for your taxes.
One thing that I've found lately is that sometimes I get those things as a PDF in an email or something like that, and those emails are often put to junk mail. So starting
Oh,
this time of year, I need to start checking my junk mail folder pretty carefully for those emails as well.
yes, that's a very good
Not
idea. Check
always.
your spam.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
But
good. So that's all important stuff.
yes, and keep it all together, and as much as you need. I have some clients through the year. Some people are better at organizing things than others. We all have our different talents and things like that. I have some clients that send it to me as they receive it because they know they're going to lose it, right? And so they're like, oh, I got my W-2 today, here it is. Got another 1099 today, I got from my bank interest. Here it is. And they send it to me all, in bits and pieces, and I just store it in a file for them, an electronic file. And that works too. Some people like to wait until they've gathered everything and then send it to me. That works as well. It just depends on what works best for you. But once you get a system down, just like you talked about before, it's pretty easy to stay consistent with that.
Right, right. That all sounds great. Am I missing anything else that we should be kind of covering, especially kind of thinking about this time of year and it's tax season almost?
Yes. It's almost
What else? What else do we need to kind of be covering for these students?
um, You know, one of the things I think as younger people that we worry about is we worried about bothering people. We worry about asking too many questions. I would say, don't worry, just be as succinct and as kind and respectful as possible, but ask the questions that you need to know. And if you still don't understand, keep asking or find somebody else, because it's just really important. I think sometimes we just think, well, this is our lot in life, and I think that's just what we're going to do, right? I'm not going to ask anybody because I've asked and I don't understand what they said back to me, right? And I feel kind of dumb. And so, there are as many different people out there and different personalities, and we get along better with others, some than others. We understand some better than others, right? Some are more patient than others, things like that. There's a tax professional out there for you. If you don't seem to jive very well with one, find another one. Um, but
It's a
don't be
little bit
afraid to ask questions.
Yeah, yeah. It's a little bit like finding a teacher, right? You have to find a teacher that you work well with, especially for your instrument or your area, your deep area of interest. And so I think that's a good point to make too. It's important to find somebody that you feel comfortable asking those questions. And
Yes, definitely.
great. That's great. Well, really, thank you so much for speaking with me today. And I'm going to be following up on this video with some information about, again, keeping track of all these materials and providing some examples just from how I do stuff, so that our students can start to think about how they should be doing this. Um, is it okay if I provide contact information for you if any students are interested in talking to you about getting some help with their taxes? At least in the future when they've got some employment.
Yes, please, by all means.
Okay,
I love answering questions. I love talking with new people and my regular clients, and so please feel free. Yes.
great, great. Well, thanks again. We really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.